Okay, thank you so much. Thanks, Hamid. Welcome, folks. Thank you for joining us today here at the Coalition webinar. We are going to be talking about the police state and crime prevention through environmental design. And my name is Tiff, or T. Guerra. My pronouns are they, them, and theirs, and I've been a member of this coalition for about 5 years and have been a part of this fight against data-driven policing for the last 4 years at least. And before we get into a little bit more about the group and the agenda today, what I'll do is I'll just pass it back to Hamid. And Hamid, if you would be so good as to take us through the agreements, that would be great.
Sure, Tiff. Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. My name is Hamid Khan with Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, and welcome to our webinar number 67. So basically, just very baseline stuff that, when you joined, you were muted. And the reason being that we've had our little share of Zoom bombings, but we will be opening it up and people can access their mics in a little bit. But in the meantime, if you want to send a message through chat or have a comment and a question, there's a raise your hand function as well. And then also the chat only goes to the host or the co-host. So we'll be opening up that as well. And this is being recorded, and this should be up on our website, www.stoplapdspying.org by Saturday or so. So thank you again. If you have any questions, comments, like I said, just hit us up. Back to you, Tim.
Thank you so much. Okay, so yeah, again, welcome folks. And this conversation that we're having today, this is part of the coalition's fight against data-driven policing. And part of that group's work, we have webinars like this for that group specifically every month on the 4th Tuesday of the month. And we have several working groups that meet at different times of the month as well. Just to give folks a little bit more information about that group, our fight is against what is called data-driven policing, and that involves policing by LAPD that is performed or justified or legitimized, attempted to be legitimized under the guise of being data-driven, which is a term that started being used here in LA around 2007 or 2008. Data-driven policing is how police refer to their programs and their actions when they are trying to indicate that they are not being racist or discriminatory. And what we do, part of the work that we do here in this group and together learning with and building with community is to take apart that verbiage and the programs and the ideology that police use and are talking about, and learn more about what is actually going on with them. And how they are operating and how they are being operationalized. Talk more about what the impact is. And the goal of this overall is to shut down these programs, to abolish them, to learn how to defund them, to replace them, and just to be sharing awareness about them, and also about, and to be unpacking that ideology and kind of the lies that get repeated that help uphold these policing programs. So kind of doing all of that at the same time. So that's a little bit more about the work of this group. Within our group, we have a few working groups. We have one that looks at kind of historic land and policing and the policing programs that LAPD has used in the past. And also we have ones that are kind of, well, they're all connected really, looking at it presently. So looking more at LAPD's data-informed community-focused policing that is operating right now. And we also have a group that is looking more at community policing, and that's something that we're going to be hearing more from today, hearing more from that group. If you're interested in learning more about our group or how to get involved in our fight, please email us, or you can message us online as well through our social media, or you can send an email to stoplapdspyingcoalition@gmail.com and we will get in touch. And just the last thing I'll say before going on to our agenda is just to also let folks know about the additional fights and meetings that we have within the coalition. On the first Tuesday of the month, we have the Gender and Sexuality Working Group. On the Second Tuesday of the month, we have the fight against the war on youth. And there is our general coalition meeting that meets on the third Tuesday of the month. And folks are welcome to join any or all of those. So for our conversation today, we're going to be continuing to talk about policing of land in Los Angeles and looking at some of what we're learning by looking at LAPD documents with regard to community safety partnerships and specific community safety partnership sites. And we will learn more about what those terms mean if folks are not already familiar with them. As folks may already be familiar, one of the ways that the coalition, as well as other organizers and individuals, get information and do research in these areas and on policing programs specifically, is to collectively file CPRAs. This stands for, just as a reminder to folks, this stands for California Public Records Act. This is an act by which California state and local government agencies must make their records available to the public. Here at the coalition, we do often use the PRA as a tool and weapon to get the LAPD and sometimes the city of LA to release records that give us information, sometimes we hope, often, about how some of these programs work or how they're funded or what some of the terminology is, information that we otherwise wouldn't have access to. And we're going to be updating about a few of those PRAs today. The two that we'll start with learning more about are from our community policing working group specifically. One of those is about the functioning of CSPs or community safety partnerships, and also about the site safety plans that are done by LAPD at those sites. And these are very much looking at applying a program called Crime Prevention through Environmental Design. And that is a framework that we'll be talking more about as well. After that, we'll talk about our Architecture of Surveillance PRA, and that is about LAPD's use of technology to gather, share, analyze data and images and video, all for use against community members. So those are some of the things that we're going to be covering today. And then we'll close with an update on 4118D, an ordinance that is going before City Council tomorrow that seeks to criminalize folks who are unhoused. And we are going to be just sharing a little update on that and just letting folks know how to participate tomorrow and how to use your voice to speak out about that, which I'm sure folks here are already engaged in. And okay, so I will now just pause for a moment and see if anyone has any questions or comments so far. And also during the meeting, feel free to add comments or questions in the chat, and we will be sure to be checking that and responding back to folks. And okay, so what we'll do is we'll just we'll keep moving, and we'll start with talking about our first PRA about CSP, community safety partnerships. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to folks in our community policing group, and that would be both Shakir and Amira are here. So I'm not sure who will be talking first, but what I'll do is I'll just pause there and pass it over to that group.
Cool, thanks, Tiff. Yeah, Amira, I mean, maybe we can start by talking about the request, but I wonder if it's because there were basically two requests that work group filed after doing other research into CSP and trying to kind of develop an understanding of what like CSP officers were doing and that. So should we maybe start with, you want to start with that background and then we can share the content of these requests?
Sure, sounds good.
As well as maybe background on CSP. Yeah, I feel like maybe we should do that first.
Oh yeah, and/or community policing. Maybe I can just say really broad stuff about community policing, that because we've also been working simultaneously on a timeline just to sort of try to situate where did this idea come from and how can we think about it? And then how does it continue to show up in these various ways? So just to do like a super quick, broad brushstroke kind of like way that we're thinking about it, or the story that's developing around that, would be that we could think of it in broadest terms in relation really to the ideas of counterinsurgency. If you think about community policing, some of its main goals, if you read the ways that it's often talked about, are to build trust within communities. This is the way that it describes itself, right? To build trust, and that the idea is that if you do that, then the neighborhood or the community will essentially like police itself, right? So in a lot of ways, it sort of sets itself up to, or leads to infiltration of it enables a way to infiltrate various neighborhoods, and then to open that up to more gathering of data, more surveillance, and these sorts of things. So that's one of the key ways that it fits into the data-driven policing sort of story. That's really broad and could go back to all the histories of colonialism that we may want to talk about. But more recently, in terms of the term itself, community policing, it seems to emerge in the 1970s. And another important thing to remember here is, or to think about, or that's key to the story, is the way that it shows up as a kind of way of sanitizing or looking like reform after a period of sort of brutal and very overt violent policing. So for instance, the way that the violent policing against the civil rights movement got such wide press, then community policing shows up as this way of saying, we're, no, we look like we're reforming, like we're doing this better, like we're getting it right, that sort of thing. So this is the general way that community policing begins to show up. And then if you notice, or we can notice the ways that it continues that cycle over and over again. So if you have a moment of, like, let's say, as we have been having recently, broad mass protests against police brutality, then community policing shows up really strongly again in terms of the ways that the police narrates themselves. So for instance, just to give one more example of that, actually exactly 1 year ago today, on July 27, 2020, the LAPD announced that they were going to take these network of community safety partnerships, what they're calling community safety partnerships, or CSPs, and they were forming a bureau out of them to bring all of these 10 sites or partnerships together under one. And this was a part of a kind of propaganda campaign to say, we're going to get policing right, we're reforming, we're going to do it better, that sort of thing. So these are just like really broad, basic ways to think about community policing. And just one other piece I would add to it is that it's really tied into a lot of the other kinds of policing that we've heard about. So in the 1970s also is introduced this idea of problem-oriented policing, and we still see that same language threaded throughout the community safety partnership sites. The different ways the LAPD describes itself as engaging in, for instance, SARA is described as problem-oriented policing. So SARA is just like this acronym for the way that LAPD describes how it's being professionalized. So here, if we want to talk about problem-oriented policing, I guess I could say there are 3 sort of P's that go along with that. The police then say, this is a way that they're becoming more professional. This is a way that they're focusing more preventive to stop crime before it happens. And it's also a way of getting more participation. And all of these 3 things, you'll see, we've seen over and over, that idea of being more professional, of being preventive, like in PredPol, these things feed into data, just justifying more data-driven policing. And the participation, again, connecting to that community idea, feeds into this idea of reform. Yeah. So, and Shakira, maybe you wanted to add, and then we could open up for some questions.
Yeah, great. Yeah, let me add a couple notes on this background too. Thank you, Amira, for covering all that and for covering that history and just kind of the way that this like idea of community policing keeps coming back and is always presented as this, oh, new reform, and this is the solution that we need, and this is what's been missing. But and I know the timeline that the group has been working on is showing how that's just been a pattern for decades, as well as traces that pattern is also, we see that same pattern in even before the term community policing was used, in other reforms, as well as from other kind of contexts of occupation and counterinsurgency and ways that like kind of a violent or occupying force is trying to win legitimacy and justify what it's doing. And so, yeah, the first thing, I mean, you were talking about this idea of building trust that's always kind of central to it. And I think just to just spell that out a little more, I think what's like really revealing and insidious about that is it kind of it pretends like the problem with policing is like just like a lack of trust by the community in it, and in that way it's almost kind of like rejecting or like I know, like gaslighting almost kind of the community that might have, you know, that knows based on its experience, based on the violence that it faces, that like the reason we don't trust police is because, you know, from a young age our kids are being brutalized in this way, or that this is what police are always doing, that they're always kind of harassing people and writing tickets and all of that. It kind of says, oh yeah, well, no, all of that's not happening. The problem is just y'all don't trust us enough. When no, like the reason that people don't trust police is kind of often based on very rationally and just, you know, based on the violence that they've experienced. So treating like the gap or the issue that exists not as like the violence that police are causing, the deprivation, the like taking away resources, the making people vulnerable, the targeting, the racial profiling, the violence and oppression. Instead, it's like, oh yeah, people just don't understand, and so we just kind of need to build more trust with them. And so yeah, so the different forms it takes, I think there's basically sort of, you know, so that's how police present themselves in these programs. Is okay, we're here to build trust, we're here to kind of restore legitimacy and kind of partner on safety. But what we know from just seeing these programs over time, that the reality is a couple different things going on. One is, first of all, these programs are a form of surveillance. More than anything, they're kind of closely mapping different relationships, different networks, like kind of who knows who spends time with who's talking to who in the community. And so it's really that kind of mapping of social networks and surveillance of our communities. And then that's one, surveillance. And two, I think is sort of, like Chela said here, co-optation and infiltration, basically kind of developing informants in the community, treating community leaders, like people who are organizing the community, as insurgents, as like people who need to kind of, whose influence needs to be checked, or, you know, rewarded and co-opted for the purpose of what police want, depending on, yeah, the extent to which they're willing to cooperate. And related to that, finally, is like dependency on police. That oftentimes, and we're going to see examples of this as we get into the materials that from the records request, is like oftentimes, yeah, these community policing is most aggressively deployed in communities that have been denied resources and do have a lack of kind of investment in resources and power. And people, you know, people are asking for, like the community is asking for things, asking for vital resources based on their needs, and those resources are denied in every way other than through policing. So they're told, no, you can't have this, like, you know, we're not going to build this in your community. We're not going to, you know, invest in after school programs. Oh, but we'll do it through police. You know, we'll do it through the LAPD budget. And so that's, you know, in a way holding communities hostage, saying that, yeah, this stuff that you need, the stuff that you've been demanding, you can only get it at the hands of police, which, you know, there's a gun in the other hand. So those are the kind of three ways that it showed that we understand community policing to be showing up in reality. And I think this is a really important moment to really be organizing against community policing. Again, not because it's new, as we've been talking about, it's been around for a long time. But one, because of what you were saying, Amira, about you know, how it's always raised in response, as a response to kind of uprising and insurgency and moments when people are really, building power and questioning the violence of police. That's always how it's arose historically. And we saw last summer, LA, or the city, used the uprising last summer as basically kind of this jumping point to expand the community policing, the community safety partnerships program into a full-fledged bureau. And I mean, they no doubt were planning on doing that for a long time, and that was obviously in the works, but they used that moment and kind of talked about it as, this is what the community's been demanding, this is what the community wants, like this is the solution, when that's really not what anyone was demanding. And then the other kind of reason that I think it's really important to look at now is the presidency of Joe Biden. Biden has, for a long time, through his entire career, really been kind of pushing for, or using this idea of community policing really as a way to increase the resources of local police departments. And even his 1994 crime bill, which has now kind of been increasingly discredited and recognized by much of society as this source of police militarization, of extreme sentencing, of harsh criminalization in all these ways, and funding so much resources to police, was always also the origins of the community-oriented policing services department within the Department of Justice, the COPS office, that's the acronym. And so that COPS office has been a major source of funding for local police departments, over the years. And Biden's tune on that has always been that actually the COPS office has always been really underfunded. I think like maybe the Bush administration or something he's been complaining didn't kind of fulfill the mandate of funding it as much as he envisioned. And so that's been a kind of issue he's been running on in the many times he's run for president. And he was even kind of part of the platform this time, is that I'm going to finally restore the funding that the COPS office has always needed, because it's never been kind of funded to its optimal, what Joe Biden envisioned in the 90s, at the same time that he was always talking about, super predators and calling for extreme crack sentencing and all of that. So we're, and even as soon as he's come into office, even in the stimulus bill and in other moves, there's been really quick move to double the funding of his budget this year, to double the funding of the COPS office. So we're seeing a moment now, and this often happens when progressives or liberals are in power, that when the Trump administration was in power, they were increasing funding to local police through all kinds of kind of their approach was, we need these drug task forces, we need to go after MS-13, we need to increase immigration enforcement. That was their channel. And then when someone like Joe Biden is in office, it's through this idea of community policing, of police reform, of using, kind of increasing police, and that's all increasing police resources. One more thing I'll say maybe is the reason that we're really focused on it in this group, in the data-driven policing group, and how it connects. And Tiff was in the beginning talking about data-driven policing, and then you kind of shared the connection, Amira, is that just as we're talking about how community policing has always been this kind of reform that pops up, LAPD, in the same time that they ended their predictive policing, kind of the first generation of data-driven policing programs, Operation Laser and Predpol, in response to community pressure and community organizing, they announced that same month that they stopped using Predpol. They launched what this group has been organizing against, the data-informed, community-focused policing kind of surveillance vision. And the reason I'm focusing on that is because basically that really weds these concepts of data-driven policing in the ways that Tiff was talking about earlier, and community policing, and kind of combines them all as one, both to like sanitize and rebrand the data-driven policing, as well as to kind of expand it and make it kind of even more bigger and more invasive in the ways that I was talking about what the true harms of community policing are. So yeah, I don't know if anything you want to add, or should we maybe see if any questions or reactions to what we're sharing so far?
Yeah, I think just one quick thing I would say is that in this going back and forth between the reform COPS Biden line and the sort of like, let's go after gangs M13 line, these things are also constantly working together at the same time as well. And that's been throughout this whole problem-oriented policing history. So for many decades, and of course before that, but just in terms of this way we think about like this back and forth between reform and then getting cracking down or whatever other language would be given to that, they both could really be seen under the rubric of broken windows policing, even though we oftentimes hear about community policing as being a different thing. And I think we'll really see that when we get to the CPTED part. I'm forgetting now again what that acronym stands for. Through environmental design is the end of it, but that is like so tied into the keeping law and order part of broken windows, and it's also so connected to community policing as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, and it's crime prevention through environmental design is the whole term. And yeah, well, I think we'll pause right now. Thank you for all that information, Amira and Shakir, and we will pause because we've been getting some good comments from folks, and I'm not sure if anybody would like to open their mic and perhaps ask a question or make a comment as well.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in because some of the things I've been thinking about right now. Hey, everybody, this is Jamie. And just kind of looking at the history of like kind of policing in Central Division. One thing that I've been thinking about a lot was in regards to community policing, particularly in Skid Row, because like Skid Row necessarily hasn't been so much like a community building, though like senior lead officers are down there. And I forget there's this one senior lead officer like that everybody knows and like praises as being like this like, you know, cool cop. I forget what his name is, but anyways, but really thinking about how during the Safer Cities initiative, something that Bratton did that I thought was really significant was simultaneously there was the rise of the business improvement districts and the intense cooperation and relationship building between business owners and their private security and LAPD. And then at the same time, the gentry that was in the new downtown. And they were doing these things called safety walks through Skid Row, and kind of realizing that part of what community policing does too, like when these waves come, that, you know, I appreciate how that's being discussed, but it also just kind of like organizing does. Like when we have a rebellion, you know, there's a certain amount of people that come in and want to organize for long periods of time against policing or find a social justice issue that they like, you know, really latch onto. And it seems like, you know, it makes me think about how community policing operates that way as well, where one of the biggest things they needed to do during that time in order to not get pushback against the brutality of the Safer Cities initiative was to organize enough of the public, like the quote unquote public, that we're going to agree and we're going to say this was necessary to, you know, brutalize, you know, people that were living in Skid Row that were either housed or unhoused. And so that, you know, so that piece of it has been really interesting to me because you know, community policing seems to be garnering, you know, it's like this facade of like saying it's actually reaching out to community where it's not. It's reaching out to nonprofits, to academics, to business owners, to real estate developers, to those folks more, and kind of building that like that intense like kind of power of support. So I know that's something I've been thinking about a lot in regards to how it operated in the early 2000s in Central Division.
Yeah, that's a great comment. Thank you, Jamie. When you just said like, you know, it's posing, community policing is posing as reaching out to community, and that's like, it's so true. And it's like, I think something that, you know, I've heard us talk about And conversation is like this idea of the, the creation of community, like they're choosing like who is that community, and it's like community in quotes, because it's like, yeah, I mean, it's like, so they're bringing in, they're deciding who is that community that they want to bring in, and it's folks that are going to be willing to work with police and who are going to be on the same page with what crime and disorder looks like and how it needs to be policed. And so yeah, it's really that like community in quotes. And something that was,
sorry,
oh sorry, please go on.
Sorry, Tiff. Also, you named nonprofits and academics. Jamie, I just wanted to jump in and say but you started by talking about bids, and I think private corporations are also a way that community gets spun so much, even if you just think about like next door, or the way that corporations play a role and private corporations play a role in pretending or even just like fomenting or supporting this kind of like community that gets, that can span other ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also about like, it's a, we hear about it being linked to like, okay, well, if we all are doing this, then that's going to take it's going to put less of a strain on police because it's less police resources if we have other people engaged in doing that policing and engaged in doing that surveillance. And so it's kind of like pulling people into, that volunteerism of acting as police as well in their neighborhoods. And something that's been really interesting that I read this week was about, the city of LA and how when they are thinking about crime prevention through environmental design, how they are looking at that in terms of rezoning areas and how land use, how changing how land can be used and what it's used for is going to have an impact on crime, and kind of specifically rezoning areas with that in mind in terms of putting more eyes on the street, which is a term that was like made popular by some, I can't even remember who the person is, but it's this idea of like specifically. Yes, thank you. I knew you would know, Jessica. Thank you. Jessica, do you want to say any more about just recognizing, Jessica, that you are, know much more about this area in terms of, urban planning and being a student of urban planning. And I'm not sure if you're able to share any more about that, but do you want to share any more about who this person is and what Eyes on the Street is about?
Yeah, I think as I was diving deeper into, just looking into CPTED, CPTED, I just recognizing the deep entanglement that exists between public departments or like service departments, right? Thinking about like social work and also the planning department that exists between these departments, and also like policing, right? And so with Jane Jacobs, she's this theorist in urban planning who talks a lot about eyes on the street, immersing yourself in the street so that you can kind of get a better sense of how to essentially like design community, right? There's also critiques about her too being exclusionary and not about people of color. But the purpose of Eyes on the Street was so that there was, enough people on the street, enough community in the street to be able to protect one another and to be able to create community so that it's like welcoming for strangers and things of that sort. But they've kind of taken and spun it around so that it's more than, it goes beyond, welcoming people. It goes, they've spun it around to policing people, right? So it's now residents, neighbors, policing one another through a program like this, right? And so to me, that was really interesting in terms of like how they've spun some of that theory, but also it kind of shed light for me in terms of like how even departments have become complicit with empowering or giving more power, extending power to law enforcement and police by creating programs like this, right? And so I think that moving forward with things like this, we need to explore how we can be more direct in refusing our ties to policing in different ways. And I think with planning too, it's how do we refuse to take part in the role of policing our community when we are thinking about environmental design, when we are thinking about community design, because this is not in any way beneficial to the community when you're surveilling the community and redeveloping a community to be more, one, to police one another, but also just to make it so that there's more room left to, I don't know, just exclude one another and also like harm, right? You're introducing harm into the community when you're policing in a way that excludes people and that harms people. I'm like going on a tangent now, but yeah, that's kind of like where I've kind of made some connections between that of urban planning, Jane Jacobs, and just this entanglement with policing.
Yeah, thank you so much for that information. Yeah, and that's kind of, I mean, just the brief amount that I read was very much kind of what you mentioned in terms of that it's you know, it's this theory, but then it gets of course seized upon by people in power and then used to decide, like, yeah, who is that community and who is, you know, eyes on the street. That can be, it depends on who those eyes are and what that goal is and what that's being used to do. So, but okay, so, and we're going to talk about crime prevention through environmental design, but did folks have anything more, Amira and Shakir, like, is there, in terms of some of the like documents that we got? I know that we did get some of the site safety plans, which we will talk a little bit more about. I know we also got a few things that were to do with, for example, how the councils are set up. The council would be the Community Safety Advisory Councils, and these are actually those are councils that I believe exist at every CSP site. And I believe also that these councils were set up just more recently. And I think that was actually following the, yeah, it actually says at the top of their guidelines document that those councils themselves were set up as part of the feedback from the UCLA evaluation of community safety partnerships that took place. So I'm just wondering if there's, like, in that document or in any of the documents that we got, if there was anything else you wanted to touch on, and if not, if you haven't had a chance to, that's totally fine. I just wanted to ask that question.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could, well, I'll defer to you, Amira, but I think we could probably share them, and then maybe we should give a little background on, I mean, I could share what the requests are, and then I know you've started kind of diving into them, Amira, so if you want to present from that.
Yeah, I could say a little bit. And I realized I never said anything about community safety partnerships, but maybe that's already been covered in the group before. But we could, I could just say quickly that community safety partnerships, just according to LAPD's own website, started in 2011 in Jordan Downs, Watts, and then expanded from there and have now expanded to 10 different sites. But what's interesting too, just in light of the conversation we've been having, is that they're named as having been originally a collaboration between HACLA, the Housing Authority of the City of Los Angeles, and the Mayor's Office of Gang Reduction and Youth Development. So just wanted to name that in terms of how these elements all come together in terms of what community policing thinks it's doing. So yeah, that's, and now, as we mentioned, just last year, the bureau was named to oversee all of these 10 sites. So that's just about CSPs. Then if you want to talk about the PRAs.
Yeah, and so I'll also just say, so they, as you said, they're a collaboration with HACLA, and they were originally, I think the first couple were in HACLA developments, though they weren't all, they haven't all been in public housing. Some of them are and some of them aren't. And now there's 10 of them, but they're also as of last year, expanding it into this full-fledged bureau. And maybe just one more thing about the piloting, and we were kind of alluding to this earlier, talking about developers and funders, is a lot of those first couple sites, including, I think, the Harvard Park site, and I forget another one, were actually funded with private donations to LAPD through the Los Angeles Police Foundation. So that included a large donation that I think was $750,000. So, over 3 years from the Ballmer Foundation, which is Steve Ballmer's foundation. Steve Ballmer's the owner of the Clippers and one of the founders of Microsoft, and also, very involved in real estate development. Another large donation was, and I might be getting those numbers wrong, so I don't remember them exactly, but and because there's different ones. Another one is it was also the Goldman Sachs Foundation. Was another kind of early funder of them. And then one thing that's always struck out to me is that the Ballmer Foundation, when they gave that money, they actually required in the grant, it says this in the city, in the city approval paperwork, that they stipulated they required for the city to fund the program out of tax dollars after the donation expired. So it was a donation of, here's money for you to be able to run it for the first couple years or whatever, but then once my donation runs out, you have to make sure you're continuing to pay for it. So it's almost a way to kind of, require the city to keep spending on this program. So yes, we've kind of known about those aspects of it. We've also, the coalition's home base of Los Angeles Community Action Network has also for a long time been organizing against the Community Safety Partnerships Program, including working closely with residents, and especially in the early years of the program, residents who were being pushed out and or facing eviction or facing police harassment through the program. Families who were affected because the police are targeting a youth in the house or targeting a relative or whatever, and then that's kind of leading to all these consequences for the whole family. So that organizing has been going on for a while, and it's just sort of and then in addition to that, we've been doing all this research on community policing and uncovering kind of how these programs were developed and how they've been funded and all of that. As well as starting to look at in the data-driven policing work group, kind of how, what the relationships are to different data-driven policing programs, as well as like kind of what are these CSP officers doing with their time? Like kind of what are they, we know what the kind of propaganda or marketing of it is, of they're like, helping children cross the street and they're handing out like free sneakers and stuff. And so, which is literally like when they come and present to the police commission, I feel like those examples are like cited every single time. They're always talking about them. This last time at the police commission, I feel like when the guy came in, he was talking about it, he was like, yeah, it's just these police officers, like the CSP officers, they just, they just care so much about the community that like, they're just willing to just like hand out money from their pockets to like just help out kids. And it's kind of just like, that's like the exact point is that, yeah, police take all of our money. And that's why like they're the one, then like we're supposed to celebrate them for like handing out coins from kind of, taking over half the police budget or the city budget. So anyway, so we've kind of been, looking at it at that level. And then the group started talking about how to follow up and really kind of dive into some like, to try to get, we know from people in the communities kind of what their experience of policing is through the community policing program. And that's, that it's just policing like it is in all these other forms. But we really wanted to develop kind of more records and expose the details of that. So this request, sorry, let me just open it up. I'll share my screen. So the request that we filed to LAPD, and this was written by the community policing work group that have been looking at all those materials and looking at the history that Amira was describing, basically focuses on two of the sites, the Jordan Downs of Pueblo del Rio, the Pueblo site. For these two, we kind of picked these 2 6-month time periods that we thought would be a good sample to really do a deep dive into, and basically requested all this data on kind of the arrests that are happening. So when we talk about CSP officers, and we hear about them buying sneakers and walking kids to school, like what are they actually doing is, we can kind of see that through the history of their arrests, as well as CompStat, which is the kind of police data system that has now existed in multiple forms within LAPD, and kind of their crime statistics and their like early really versions of data-driven policing, as well as activity logs that the officers write, as well as and these activity logs and reports are a document that we heard kind of referred to at the police commission. I think Tiff, you heard that and pointed that out. As well as all the sites, they assemble these community safety advisory councils, as well as they kind of work with the neighborhood watch. So to get those records, as well as referrals made from the program. Like Amira mentioned, it was originally kind of a collaboration between HACLA and the Mayor's Office of Gang Reduction and Youth Development, GRID. So kind of how many youths are being referred out to that program, which is kind of also a surveillance and counter-radicalization program targeting youth, as well as a bunch of other records from across the entire program. So I'm not going to get into that latter list, because just wanted to say about this first list that we've started now receiving some records on these. We got a bunch of, what's really interesting was we got a bunch of these logs from these sites that I think provide kind of a firsthand account on, from the police of what they're actually doing with their time in the site. So those are records that we got. And, if anyone's interested in joining us, I haven't really started diving deep into them, but I know Amira, you've started looking at them. So if there's anything you want to share from that, but otherwise just wanted to mention all this as an invitation to anyone who's interested in kind of joining this work and helping us start working through these materials and making sense of them. But Amira, maybe I can pass it back to you if you want to share about just kind of the first pass that you've been making through this stuff.
Yeah, super preliminarily, like a quick look, some just big invitation to anybody who would be interested in looking further. But the activity logs basically look like ticks on a grid, and there's a bunch of activities listed, and then it'll be like one, or how many of each of these things have been done. And by far, the ones that have the most tick marks, basically the activities that are most done in these logs are things like warnings, parking citations, and field interviews. So, it seems really super clear. There is a vague category about community something that has some things in there, and it's unclear like what that means. Interestingly, foot beats or foot patrols are redacted. They seem to be redacted. So I don't know what the reason for that would be.
One example, I don't know if this is a good one to share with. This is just
yeah, definitely. So you can see their parking citations. And then that community, can you see what it says? Community contacts? Community contacts, yeah. And that's actually the most. So, but it's this vague, really vague category.
So that's that category, and we're I think earlier we tried to do this effort by closely analyzing mission sheets and other documents, and now we're doing these. There's another PRA request that I can. That's a simpler one that I can share. But first, any questions? Oh yeah, I see Jamie. Okay, let me. Yeah, so the categories are, well, the first is supervisor deployed and officers deployed. Those must have been like names or initials or something, because those are redacted. And then the first one is business meetings. and then which goes back to what you had been talking about earlier, Jamie, as well as Amira. And then next is community contacts, then community events, then footbeat, and that's all under the deployment category. And then there's the productivity category, which is field interviews, moving citations, parking citations, and vehicles impounded. It's like, it's interesting. Productivity, I guess it's like sort of making sure that like they're doing things, and the things they have to be doing is almost like quota, like, you know, doing more citations and impounding more vehicles and interviewing people. And then arrests, there's different types of arrests: felony arrests, misdemeanor arrests, RFC and ACE. I don't know what those might stand for. I don't know if anyone has ideas, as well as warnings. And then details is flyer distribution, school checks, youth contacts, field roll calls, and then youth programs. And then there's also radio calls, reports, and school meetings. Those are the categories.
Yeah, I didn't look at all of them. It's interesting on this one, warnings is 0, but on a lot of the ones that I looked at, warnings were one of the highest categories. So it was like just circulating and giving warnings to folks was the picture that you would get.
Yeah, Jamie's pointing out that a lot of it is just youth contact. And then Ahmed says, yeah, out of a lot of those contacts, what comes are field interview cards, which officers fill out. And then that's the data. When we talk about data-driven policing, that's a lot of what the data is that's flowing into all these systems. Either Jamie or Ahmed, do you want to share about or elaborate any more on those comments?
Well, I mean, that was this has been this whole history of stop and frisk, and then gathering individual data has been one of the most weaponized ways to put people into these databases. And obviously, Operation Laser, when we talk about chronic offender program, that was one of the key element of for scoring the quality interaction with law enforcement. So anytime you were stopped. And then they also have claimed that, yes, that has been one of the primary movers of how we have been, building this database. So in essence, just on one hand, we talk about gang databases, but on the other hand, and it's also not only that, that your data is going in, but now you're in a database. So anytime, and this can be used against you as a police interaction, as a way, so it immediately makes you suspect, and it's chalked up against you. So in any form of risk assessment type, so data-driven policing, and that's exactly what data-driven policing comes down to. So thank you.
This is really, amazing, and I'm really appreciative. I'm really happy that I jumped on this webinar. So super excited to just be, exposing this stuff. One thing I had a question about, because I know, like in Jordan Downs, and thinking about these CSPs, and kind of a lot of the work we're doing in land and policing is kind of looking at like policing tactics, and then looking at redevelopment. And one of the concepts I came up on with current urban development and tactics they're using is this idea of deconcentration of poverty. And so particularly attacking like areas like skid rows, because there's lots of skid rows throughout the nation, but like public housing. And and I was asking Hamid, and kind of was commenting about with Jordan Downs, particularly when I started kind of, being around the crew of Ali Khan and the coalition, there was a big fight for them. And the way they would deconcentrate poverty is the idea was to bring in mixed income, right? So like what we're seeing happening in Skid Row right now is they want to bring in the mixed income around affordable housing, because, they want to make other people handle the poverty, not make it all concentrated in one area. So public housing being seen as like a concentration of poverty as well. So if you bring in this mixed income, it increases property values, you can distribute people around. So I'm wondering, like in this records request, first of all, I don't even know if the development in Jordan Downs went through. Like, did they finish? Because I know that was the big fight, was halting it. And then that's when they were kind of discovering all the lead and everything that was in the ground, and they were going to try to dig everything up. They were talking about moving people out, how that was going to happen. But CSP was like launched there like a couple years before that whole fight like got really in gear. So just thinking about, again, how, CSP is really about pitting family against family, like the good family, as opposed to the family that needs to be brought to justice, or the ones that's going to risk you being evicted. So who do you snitch? Who do you make, who do you build ally with as far as the cops? Because the cops are there just to intimidate you. So I'm wondering, in looking at that too, if we know what happened in Jordan Downs, and if we know like in the Pueblos and in these other areas where CSP is, if there's plans for mixed income development as they start to redevelop these public or if there's ideas of redeveloping them, since in 2011 in that time they were thinking about doing that to Jordan Downs. And that's a common, and I was wondering, Jessica, if you might know if that's a common thing around public housing now, where they're trying to, because a lot of public housing is, is kind of old. And so how they're trying to, and especially thinking about South Central and South LA, since it's like the next spot where they're really trying to gentrify it and move people out, as we've seen in maps too of displacement maps.
Yeah, all that comes to mind right now is, I think it was I don't know if they were, what was it called? It was under Trump, and they were called something, I think it was empowerment zones, or I think I'm getting the terms wrong.
Yeah.
Focusing on blighted areas, or quote unquote blighted areas, to kind of redevelop them. So that's kind of like where I see that connection of like targeting some of these areas, some of these public housing areas, to kind of create more mixed housing development. And I know that that's been the case a lot along Skid Row, but I'm trying to see if we can get a timeline together to see like if there's any other developments that have used that same tactic to target these public housing areas, or also if there's anything in the works, right? Like, I don't know, with this infrastructure plan too, right? Like if there's anything in the works to continue targeting these areas and creating more mixed use development. Because I think the idea too is, once they create more mixed use development, or mixed use development, mixed income development, the idea is that more people from the suburbs or that are mixed income, people that are more wealthy will sort into these mixed income developments, and therefore free up, other housing developments or other residencies, so that other people can move out to. But that's not always the case. There's just like a huge discrepancy, because a lot of times people don't move out into these mixed income, units or developments, and these places stay vacant, not really addressing the housing issue. So I'll take a look at that I'll take a look into that a little bit more, just to see if we can secure a timeline, and whether or not there's something in the horizon as it relates to that.
Any more questions or comments? I think anybody can unmute their mic. So if if anyone wants to jump in, feel free.
Okay, yeah, and I'm just kind of pausing to look at some of these comments in the chat as well. Susan, I don't know if you're able to unmute, or if you want to unmute, and if you don't, that's okay. But did you want to talk more about, like, you have a comment here, crime prevention through environmental design is a myth. So I'm not sure. I can also just read that out, but if you'd like to say any more about that.
Yeah, Tiff. Well, I just see the police getting more and more high tech, and it's like a weaponized surveillance. It's because they're going to pick and choose what they want and who they want to target, and they're creating their own product so that they can continue. That's, I don't know what you call that, but that's what it seems like to me. So, and and they're murderous. And I'm sorry, I suppose I shouldn't say that so bluntly, but they are. So you can count on them to take it too far, and you know they do, because history tells us. And also, a lot of this is coming from decades, almost centuries of imperialism in the United States. And now they're just shutting down the wars in the Middle East, or at least they're saying they are. We know that the United States loves to go to war and stay at war, but nonetheless, they're going to import all that corruption that they exported to the Middle East is going to be imported back into the United States. And then the police departments are becoming more and more militarized, and they have to continue to create their product. That's what they sell. So, you know, I just kind of have a dim view of it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Susan, for sharing that. And it's good to hear your voice again. It's been a while, so yeah, I'm glad to hear from you. And yeah, I mean, you're right that yeah, and we encourage being blunt when we're speaking about these things, as much as folks are comfortable to do that, of course. But you're right that it is, of course, you know, it's another kind of reframing of crime prevention to kind of justify what is actually having police being able to control an environment and put restrictions on an environment, and to have the city collaborate with that as well. Like the city are willing partners in that, and using that to justify adding surveillance and adding all of these controls and regulations and spaces, and kind of inserting themselves into that. And Shakir, I see you have your hand up. Why don't you go for it?
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to, some stuff that Susan said in her comment that I thought was really on point, and we just wanted to like share also stuff that we've seen from our research. One, the talking about like kind of direct connections to U.S. imperialism and U.S. wars in the Middle East. So one of those, going back to like we were talking about in the beginning, the Biden or the COPS program, the DOJ COPS funding, we found these grants actually that were used early on to fund and basically hire police for the CSP program, that were grants that came from, and I think they were during the Obama administration. They might have been during, I think it was the Obama administration, that there were grants basically giving money from the federal government to LAPD specifically for the CSP program, specifically in a couple HACLA developments that required for all the hiring under that grant, and I think it was like to hire like 25 officers or something, had to be veterans of post 9/11 military action. So, and it specifically said, like, I think like active military duty, you know? So like, it's like they wanted you to actually have been there, you know, occupying Iraq or Afghanistan after 9/11 specifically. And so that, and then that's who was staffed, and that's who was sent into housing, into the HACLA developments as running the CSP program. And then just more broadly is that we've been talking a lot about counterinsurgency and how it applies. And I think along the lines that Susan's saying, just like there's all this militarization that comes from, you know, police like getting all these like tanks and grenades and technology and stuff coming from the US military, also these tactics and like there's like theories of how you police is very much based on kind of counterinsurgency practices and methodologies developed in those wars. And actually we have kind of a small group in the coalition that's doing a close reading of the U.S. Army's counterinsurgency field manual that's written by General Petraeus, who was the whatever commander or whatever of the I think both Afghanistan and Iraq wars. And so there's a number of folks here who are part of that. I know Charles, I see you, and Hamid and stuff. So If anyone else is interested in that group too, yeah, we're reading the counterinsurgency field manual together.
And then additionally, a few numbers back, I'm sorry, we talked about the deadly exchanges between US police departments and Israel defense forces or military forces, the ways that those kinds of counterinsurgency tactics and weapons and technology are also exchanged back and forth.
Yes, and what we'll do now is, I realize it's 7:10, so we will be keeping it moving and moving on to just talking a little bit more about crime prevention through environmental design. But this has been a really good conversation. So I also just wanted to see if folks do have additional comments or questions, especially as we're talking and learning more about community policing and about community safety partnerships. Specifically, we are interested, in joining with folks and in hearing from folks who have, been a part of those programs or have some experience with those policing programs, or perhaps have an experience with GRID as well, which has been going on in LA for a long time. And that's something that we're going to be kind of continuing to work on is engaging in folks around those specific programs and learning more. So just wanted to kind of pause for a second and see if there's anyone perhaps present that has had those experiences, and if you felt like sharing, and if not, that's okay as well. Okay, so I will move on to the next section then. If we don't have any other questions, and again, just use the chat at any time. Thank you so much, Shakir and Amira, for sharing that information. And again, folks, if you're interested in joining that group specifically that's working on the community policing and kind of delving more into that and those looking at those documents, you can contact us at Stop LAPD Spying, and we will kind of loop you into that. So what we'll do now is we'll move on to talk about, we've just been talking about crime prevention through environmental design, or at least we've been kind of bringing it into the conversation and kind of naming what it is a little bit. And now we're going to talk a little bit more about what that program is, and a little bit about how it's being applied at these sites. And I say a little bit because I haven't had the opportunity to spend a lot of time with these documents yet either, but it's just to kind of give folks an overview. And also we have been kind of wanting to talk about crime prevention through environmental design because it is something that keeps coming up in every policing program, similar to community policing. It is something that keeps popping up. It's not new. It's just a name that they put on something to justify some tactic of policing that they are intending to do or wanting to do anyway. And it does kind of have a catchy name. We've sometimes had folks ask us what it is, thinking that it's something positive because it has the word environment right in there, and it's not positive, obviously. So we did want to talk a little bit more about what it is and the history of it. And either Hamid or Shakir, are you able to share some of the slides that I prepared for this? It's not too many. Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so yeah, when I was looking back on what is crime prevention through environmental design, just thinking about like how it's being applied today. We knew it's not a new program, but I was interested to find this quote from 1285. So crime prevention through environmental design is essentially this idea. It's based on a few fundamental things, but one of them that's kind of key to it is this idea of natural surveillance and how we can structure an environment to have less crime because we are able to kind of naturally surveil it, meaning there are not a lot of obstacles, there are not a lot of things in our way. It's very open which of course means it's not private for folks as well, is what you're giving away there. And so, what this quote says is, so this is from King Edward I, and this is the Statute of Winchester in 1285. It is likewise commanded that the highways from market towns to other market towns be widened where there are woods or hedges or ditches, so that there be no ditch, underwood, or bushes where one could hide with evil intent within 200 feet of the road on one side or the other side. And if perchance there is a park near the highway, it will behoove the lord of the park to reduce his park until there is a verve 200 foot wide at the side of the highway, as aforesaid, or to make a wall, ditch, or hedge that malefactors cannot get over or back to do evil. So this is kind of the first time, well, it's not obviously the first time that this kind of thing has been used, but that's kind of one of the first places that it showed up in terms of this idea of natural surveillance to thwart people from doing evil, the state having eyes on all things and not allowing people privacy. And can we go to the next slide, please, Hamid? Thank you. Okay, so in LA, how it was formalized first and introduced first was in 1995. It was by Council Member Laura Chick, who created an interagency task force that was called Design Out Crime. And that was led by representatives of the city planning department and LAPD and a number of city agencies. And the task force eventually developed a set of guidelines that were adopted officially by City Council. And these guidelines were distributed to developers, architects, urban planners, and other folks involved in the design of building housing projects. And it was also used by city agencies, such as the housing department, as criteria in evaluating which projects were worthy of city funding. And LAPD's crime prevention unit also consulted with developers to get them to incorporate these techniques into their projects. And I'll just pause there and catch up on the chat. And let's see. Ooh, I see that, Shakir. Did you want to? Shakir, do you think that's something we could possibly watch right now, or is that maybe not? Maybe it's just good to refer folks to that.
Yeah, I never am able to do like the sharing the sound from video, so I think, yeah, I don't know how to do it.
So maybe we can take a look at that separately, but that's a good find. I don't think I've probably seen that. Thank you for sharing that. But let me also read so around minute 19, so that's kind of long. An LAPD officer is talking about why there shouldn't be trees and shrubs in neighborhoods they police. So yeah, so this is one of many downsides about crime prevention through environmental design, is that police do use it as a way to cut back trees, remove shrubs, bushes, hedges, sometimes remove trees entirely. And of course, this is not a good thing for communities. It's something that communities actually need, and it actually helps with heating, and it helps with people's wellness and well-being. So, okay, so moving on from that slide, if we look at the next one, yes, I agree, Dylan. Okay, so in terms of how crime prevention through environmental design is defined by LAPD, what we see here is language from a press release from 2001, and it hasn't changed a lot. So what they talk about today is pretty much the same. It's kind of fundamentally the same. So some of the fundamental principles are focused around like natural surveillance, natural access control. What that means is like having barriers, having controlled access to spaces, so having gates that lock. So kind of just like, again, putting barriers around things, being able to control a space and being able to control where access to that space is. And the idea behind that is because they want to be able to surveil that and to be able to more easily monitor. I believe the term is like make spaces less permeable. So if a space doesn't have really set established boundaries that are kind of concrete or fence or something that is more solid, then it's more permeable, and they see this as being related to more likely that crime will take place there, or that evil will be done, I'm sure, as King Charles would say. So those are some of the fundamentals. And if we look at the next slide, please. And these are just a couple of additional things that we're seeing in general about crime prevention through environmental design. So it has always, since it was introduced, been connected to community policing. It is seen as a way for community to, again, community in quotes, to engage in policing and surveillance, and to be responsible and participating in the policing of spaces by having those eyes on the street. It has been also incorporated into data-driven policing in terms of gathering data and surveillance, having additional folks watching, justifying the use of cameras on sites. And as we know, data-driven policing does thrive on surveillance, observations, patrols, all these types of surveillance. And all of that is justified by the use of crime prevention through environmental design fundamentals, and by kind of applying that program. And I'll just pause here again to catch up on the chat and also see if anyone had a question or a comment. Yeah, and I see your question, Audrey. Let me just read that question. Aren't sites with public housing also forced to install surveillance cameras? Yeah, that's absolutely true. Part of CSP programs is the installation of CCTVs, which is the camera system that feeds directly into LAPD cars, LAPD patrol cars, and also LAPD departments, like their kind of their central processing places that they're looking at this information. So yes, that's a part of the program, and that those cameras are actually paid for by the housing department as well. Okay, and if we look at the next slide, what we'll see is, just to kind of give us reference, this is a diagram that we've developed just recently, and this is kind of how we're mapping out and thinking about data-informed community-focused policing, which is just the most recent version of data-driven policing. And if we are thinking and talking about crime prevention through environmental design specifically, and how that fits in here to this cycle, we would be looking at kind of the middle column. And if we see like the community surveillance, that top block is kind of giving us an idea of community safety partnership site. And if we see all the cameras that are on there, that would be crime. I mean, it's also just like basic LAPD surveillance, but some of those are justified by these site safety plans that we're seeing being done at these CSP sites. So, which is when LAPD walks through with members of the CSP council, which again have to be okayed and agreed upon by LAPD, and kind of walking through the site and saying, okay, where are these intersections, where are these buildings and these locations where we need additional lights, where we need additional cameras, additional surveillance. And again, that is done under the guise of crime prevention through environmental design. Crime prevention through environmental design is also applied at sites that are not CSP. So any of the other, buildings, businesses in a community could also be subject to LAPD kind of targeting that site and maybe having a conversation with a site owner or a business owner about adding additional surveillance or lighting to an area, again, under that guise of reducing crime and disorder. But when LAPD is having that conversation, you know that that information is going to be feeding directly back to LAPD. And Yeah, just seeing Jamie's comment here. And Jamie, I don't know if you want to again comment out loud, but reading that your comment, this all feels like military operations, like the 1990s seem to set a lot of theoretical ground to be built on, like ComStat, et cetera, legitimized by reform that the consent decree supposedly imposed, but seems like it was the plan all along. And I don't know if you want to say any more about that, Jamie.
No, I mean, yeah, it just amazes me like how much of the 90s, because I was even like reading about Daryl Gates a little bit in the public disorder intelligence division, and just like thinking about the infiltration and the kind of the ideas of like, you know, these kind of the infiltration that was already going on in like city council and these like, you know, these divisions, intelligence divisions already existing in LAPD, and thinking about the science of ComStat and even this crime prevention through environmental design. And, you know, knowing that community policing is already kind of like in the works as this counterinsurgency tactic, even how you all have been explaining it. And then it just makes like, it's almost like I feel like they knew that, you know, the kind of battering ram and like Rodney King and the rebellion, that like it's like they and the Rampart scandal, it's like they knew they were going to get busted like somewhere along the lines. They know that their brutality will get called out, and then the consent decree just like gave them the cover to start, you know, continuing to implement the military operations that they always intended on. And the military operations were exactly to kind of bring in this more covert form of surveillance that wasn't dependent on a battering ram, but more dependent on things that like you've displayed here with the CSOCs and the ACCICs, the Joint Regional Intelligence Center, like surveillance equipment, whatever, that like, you know, they were already like, they were developing, like folks have been saying, like this has all been going on. So I don't know. It just makes it all seem like fucking consent decree was a joke. Wasn't even real, you know, like was that just a ploy, you know? I don't know. Anyways.
Yeah, agree very much. Yeah, it's like the narrative is constantly, people's demands are constantly being twisted in terms of like the demands that folks are making and being put on police and being put on the city, and then they get, you know, twisted and turned into something that the police would reframe it as, and that the city would reframe it as, and that of course is what reform is all about. I'll pause and see if there's any additional questions. Yes, so much. Okay, so, and if we look at this is the last slide on this section. So as far as crime prevention through environmental design at community safety partnership sites, you know, we talked a little bit about it, and the way we're kind of seeing it, you know, this isn't new, as we've said, the concept isn't new. The program isn't new, but the way that they're trying to make it seem more formal, like a lot of what LAPD is doing with data-informed community-focused policing and with community safety partnerships as well, what they're trying to do is they're trying to make it seem like, oh, this is all very much like we have a lot of forms, we have a lot of policies in place so that everything is being done by the book, we're ticking all the boxes, we have a plan in place. So this is kind of one of the outcomes of that, is they're saying at every CSP site, we are going to be doing these site safety plans. And essentially these are like safety assessments that are, like I said, they're kind of the walkthroughs that they have where they basically go through, and we can see some of the, and we did get one of these site safety plans for each of the sites. And what they tell us is they all kind of start out the same way. And they tell us like, what are some of the things that we're looking for that we think would make the community more safe? And just checking, yes, area of large group of gang, yes, without camera. Yeah, these are really interesting to read. And it's interesting because it's like when you read these, and sometimes, when you read these, kind of what we're hearing from folks, and Shakir, I don't know if you can add any more on this point, but like what we hear from folks is like, okay, like, yeah, like some of these are things that the community has been asking for. Like, yes, like people do need crosswalks to make sure that they can safely cross the street, and curbs do need to be painted in some instances so it's more clear, or parking needs to be added, or there's certain things like lights, like I'm sure that in some places we like to have additional lights, not necessarily from LAPD, but lighting is not always a bad thing. So it's like some of these things are things that the community is in favor of, but it's kind of looking at who is making that assessment, why are they putting these plans in place, like who is deciding that this is the safety plan that needs to be put in, and then what is being done with those cameras, and then like the lights, what are they being used to illuminate? So it's kind of it's that part of it, and also like why are these funds just coming now, and what other funds do these communities need and have been asking for that haven't been getting but are now getting through, in the name of public safety. They're getting these types of funds for these items, but not for other things that would improve folks' lives and that folks deserve to have. So yeah, I'll pause there. And I don't know if anyone has questions about that, or Shakir, I don't know if you had any other comments about that as well.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit, because I remember as we were looking at these and we were sharing them with some of the people at LA Can who were involved in the organizing around CSP early on, that they were saying, actually, I mean, they were like looking at these and they're like, wow, this is like some of these like obvious, like, a lot of this is obviously, actually the main thing that you see here is a lot of just we need to put cameras up everywhere, as well as like lights and things, but some of the stuff around like crosswalks, as well as kind of, yeah, like curb lines and those kinds of things that are, aspects of the infrastructure, the built environment that are kind of important for just like safety from car accidents and things like that. That Steve at LA Can was saying that they had kind of at some point with the residents done a walkthrough with, I think, city council members explaining, or with the city council member there saying like, yeah, we want this and we want this. And the answer at the time was, no, there's no funding for that we can't afford that. We can't do the crosswalk here. We can't fix this, fence or whatever. And so it's just so infuriating, but also what you would expect that when the community was asking for them just independently, autonomously in that way, there wasn't any money for it. But now, it comes instead through this process of the police assessment. And then suddenly now there's the resources for it alongside all this other shit like cameras and all that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and we're also seeing, like, as we look at these plans, and this is the last thing I'll say before I move on, is that we're also seeing how it's, as Jamie mentioned, like it's being used to justify the surveillance of like group gatherings. So for each of these safety plans, it essentially, I can't remember like how long each document is, but it does kind of go through and say like, these are specific locations where we need to make these changes. And in some instances, it's talking about like, this is a gathering spot for this group of folks, and we need to add cameras to this, we need to add lighting. So it's already looking for ways to be surveilling spaces, and also to be controlling where folks meet. So kind of determining where are those gathering places that we think communities should be able to gather, and where are those places that we're saying, no, folks shouldn't be able to gather there. And we're going to kind of figure out how to manipulate the environment, or how to spy on folks, and how to kind of be able to criminalize folks who are gathering there, or gather information on them. So you're really seeing kind of that being laid as well, which, I guess, naively, that's always been in place. That is part of what they have been doing already at these sites, but this is kind of how it's being, again, like kind of got that little stamp of community approval, and we're doing this together with community with these walkthroughs. It's getting that stamp of like community policing put on it as well, trying to legitimize it. So those are like some of the things we're seeing from these site safety plans. We are going to be like taking a deeper look at that. If folks are interested in doing that with us, definitely get in touch with us. Or if folks may live in these neighborhoods or communities where these CSPs are located, we're definitely interested in talking with folks. So please get in touch with us. And okay, and I'll pause again for any questions. Okay. All right, and so we'll move on to the last item on our agenda, which is to be just sharing back about an additional PRA that is very much related to all of this. And I think I see somebody's hand.
It's me. Again, I've been talking a lot, but yeah, just one thing that I remember that actually isn't listed on these assessments, but I've kind of heard from a couple different places now is yeah, in the same time in the past when communities were asking for those fixes and stuff, they were also like asking for to be able to have like kind of community gardens as well as like growing their own food and having community garden patches and things like that, and those were all denied. And then so another part of crime prevention through environmental design that you hear about a lot that isn't in these assessments but is part of the thing in general is like preventing neighborhoods and communities that are trying to become autonomous by growing their own food from doing that. And so that's another kind of aspect of how CPTED is like talked about as this good for the environment, but really is harming the environment and people's kind of independence.
Yeah, thank you for sharing about that. Yeah, and that's those are like examples of some of the things that we are eager to be learning more about, is learning more about that as well. But what we'll do now is we will move on to our next item, which is the architecture of surveillance, PRA. It's very much linked to all of these things that we've already been talking about, of course, in data-driven policing, the architecture of surveillance. And if Hamid, are you able to share? I just have like a couple slides about this, and then we are going to hand it over to Jenny to talk more about. Perfect. Yeah, if we could just look at that right now. But yeah, so folks, I'm sure are familiar with this already. This is, architecture surveillance is a term that has been used by the coalition for many years. It does refer to those LAPD tools, weapons, we would call them, devices, systems of capturing information, capturing images, video, or systems and tools of analyzing information and sharing information coming from the community, data and information from the community, and what all of those form together, kind of those pickup points and those capture devices, and then also that network of information sharing. This is what we refer to as the architecture of LAPD surveillance. And this is kind of the one of the first diagrams that I'm familiar with. Actually, the first diagram I was familiar with was written on butcher paper by Hamid and Marker. But this is the digital version of that, and it hasn't been updated, but I did want to share it because it's been such a great tool in talking about this technology. And if we could just go to the next slide. Thank you. And after this, I'm going to hand it over to Jenny to talk more about some of what we're learning in this PRA. But this is just saying, like, with the architecture of surveillance, what is our fight? And this little graphic that is something that was developed by a baby anarchist, and it was a whole part of a series, and it was like developed out of some of the work that folks have been doing in what we've been learning from looking at the PRA documents, or looking at the documents that we got back from LAPD, from asking for more information on what is some of the ways that LAPD is gathering information and asking for, you know, a lot of information in a lot of specific areas. One of those was body cameras, and then also combining that with the work that the defund group has been doing to like really look at the LAPD budget and look at what's in that budget, what they've been spending money on, what they've been hiding and lying about, and kind of so combining that information together. And we kind of created, or Baby Anarchist created, a series of graphics that we were able to share with folks. And this is just one panel. But yeah, so essentially, this is a PRA that was filed, I believe, in 2019, perhaps. It did take the LAPD a long time to get back to us, to respond, because they kind of refused to respond to it. And so we had to kind of go back and forth with them a few times. And finally, we did get some information. We have been going through those. And just going back to this question of what is our fight? So as a coalition, our fight is to defund, to dismantle all tools and weapons of state surveillance and intelligence gathering. We're not interested in creating policies for them or replacing them with a kinder or gentler surveillance, but we are interested in defunding them, dismantling them, removing them entirely, at least in terms of what is being used by the state or is being used against communities. And how we do that is by uncovering information to learn more through PRAs, through also just research in general, by talking with folks, by doing interviews and having conversations. And also part of that fight is like in creating art to share that information, creating community pop-ed, and also creating space to have conversations, to be talking about what are the things that we're doing as said, what are the ways to defend against this, what are the ways to defund these programs, and engaging in kind of support and mutual aid. So that's part of our fight around the architecture of surveillance. And with that, I will pass it over to Jenny, who has been, and I will let Jenny introduce herself. And we've been just very glad to have Jenny working on this and looking at, taking the time to look through these documents. And Jenny's just going to share just a few things with us today because it is a lot. There's a lot of information in there, but we're really excited to be sharing some of that with folks. And Jenny, are you able to hop on now?
Yeah, thanks so much, Tiff. Hi, everyone. My name is Jenny. I've been interning with the coalition this summer, and my internet has been pretty wonky. So unfortunately, I think I need to turn my video off when I do sort of talk about this, but I just wanted to like put a face to the black box on the screen before I did. So like Tiff said, you know, I've been going through this 2019 like documents from the CIPRA and have been sort of pulling out bigger themes and been getting a lot of feedback from Hamid and Shakir, and Tiff especially helped me sort of identify things that were like more pertinent to the coalition work that's been going on. And so some of the larger narratives that I think we wanted to highlight around this PRA and around the architecture of surveillance are sort of academic complicity and collaboration, information about the scale and scope of ALPR, communications with LAPD and Ring, more information around area crime and community intelligence centers and neighborhood engagement areas. And like for the sake of time, I think we're just going to touch on academic complicity and potentially ALPR if time permits, more in depth today, and then revisit the other ones next time. But in terms of academic complicity, it's like some of the larger themes and something like the coalition was asking for specifically around this PRA is to really understand the span of academic collaboration and the span of experimentation that were going on within like folks in academia. And some of the like standouts that Tiff helped pull out from this CIPRA are in 2016, Craig Uchida and the Justice and Security Strategies Inc., which, you know, created Operation Laser, were subrecipients on a grant to act as the city's research partner for the Los Angeles Crime Gun Intelligence Center to conduct and process a like quote unquote impact evaluation of the activities at the center, its use of National Integrated Ballistic Integration Network and E-Trace, and its efforts of ShotSpotter on crime reduction and response times. And Uchida was asked to determine the impact of the activities of the Crime Gun Intelligence Center on crime reduction within a specific neighborhood of LA, and to develop a number of products that would be useful to the practitioner and research communities. So this was sort of pulled out as something that would be important to know more about, especially because we just want to know more about what's going on with Uchida, and also as it relates to ShotSpotter. So things that we can look into more. And then another standout was in 2010, LAPD signed this MOA with Jeff Brantingham from UCLA and George Tita from UCI about a 3-stage research project on forecasting gang violence. And the project uses mathematical models designed to predict earthquakes in order to quantify the differences in background risk of violence between different rival gangs, as well as times at which different rival gangs may spike about normal levels. So it was ultimately designed to develop and conduct field tests of like prototype software tools that would be used for quote unquote like real-time forecasting of gang violence. And so the data used for the project consists of data from the Hollenbeck division and field interview cards, which we were talking about earlier, as well as like, quote unquote expert knowledge, whatever that is. And the project proposed to use FI cards to map the spatial and temporal activity patterns of known or suspected gang members. And so this project talks about like mapping gang set space, which seems like a precursor of anchor points, because it refers to like particular addresses, street corners, street segments, or sometimes the entire neighborhood. And the like last stage of the research project, the testing of the forecasting gang violence tool, would be conducted in partnership with LAPD's predictive policing initiative. And then the last thing we learned about this MOA was that it was the researchers proposed to create a gang social network and violent crime database from it. Okay, I'm gonna just check to see the chat really quick. Cool.
Yeah, I'll just jump in and say my comment.
Great.
I was just thinking about like, because I've seen before how LAPD does like, it uses that, it sends out that FI card data to researchers to be like, here, look at this data. What can you learn from it, or how can you create a tool from it? And I'm just wondering to what extent that affects, like, are they, sorry, I'm kind of getting caught up in my thinking, because I'm thinking about also how like with Operation Laser, Craig Uchida they specifically had officers just using FI cards, gathering information on everyone as much as possible, so they could be generating that data to be like learning like who's out there, to be just gathering all these data points. So I'm just wondering to what extent, like, so these, how does that affect these relationships? Or I'm sorry, how do these relationships affect the fact that LAPD is now is stopping people? Like, is it, or I don't know, because they would probably be doing that to some extent anyway, but I'm just thinking about that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't have the answer to that, but if anyone else has any ideas. Cool. Well, I just wanted to, so Jamie asked what the year of the grant or the MOA was, and so I'll just read out what I put in the chat, which is that the MOA with Jeff Brantingham and George Tita was 2010, and the project was set to last from March 2010 to October 2013, with the last year sort of devoted to conducting field tests. And I guess I'll just say the last part of the like bigger part of the academic complicity part, and then we can sort of open it up for more questions. But there's also a 2015 NDA with George Tita for assisting LAPD with analyzing arrest data. And that project was called Identifying Social Networks of Arrestees in the Illegal Firearms Market. And so the goal was to create a social network analysis of arrestees to look for patterns of association that might tell them something about firearm violence and gun trafficking. And the arrest data was linked to individuals identified by like ATF trace or E-trace data, but the project was designed to help understand like the quote unquote larger social network of arrestees so that LAPD could try and identify others who weren't in the ATF trace data and might be like susceptible to quote unquote falling victim to or perpetrating gun violence in the future. So that felt like a very standout research project that was going on. And so, yeah, I'm going to stop there and just see if there's other questions in the chat or see if like what folks feel about these collaborations, if there's questions about what's been said, like where folks want to like know more.
Hey, Jenny. So I'm sorry, I'm probably gonna make you repeat stuff, but the last one I get, it was social network analysis, kind of looking at gun trafficking, but then like the greater idea to map. The one before that, the object of it, of that MOA, was that for gang activity or where they're hanging out, or what were they necessarily trying to map, or the goal of that one?
Yeah, so I think they were, no, and also no worries. I know it's like hard to have a black box just like talking at you about like a lot of really scary and like dense information. So I'm happy to repeat whatever makes sense. So it was like, you know, they are mapping sort of set space in terms of like, you know, addresses and, you know, street corners and entire neighborhoods. But like they said that it was like to predict real-time gang violence. So like they don't really define it more than that, just sort of like wanting to know when suspected gang violence is going to happen on a street corner and being able to like, you know, project when that's going to happen based on this mathematical model of surveillance. So that was sort of like the forecasting gang violence research assignment that they were working on. Does that answer your question, Jamie?
Yeah, I'm just thinking of what, I guess part of what I'm thinking of is how, you know, when we think about gang violence and, you know, thank you for like the popularizing of it, like forecasting gang violence. And I think about how they're building off of like old, like if you think about gang injunctions and gang databases, they're almost like CompStat, where there's an area where they've collected enough data that gangs hang out. So that area now has an injunction, right? And there's a list of people that are not allowed to go to that space. Similarly, CompStat was like, okay, in this particular spot over the last month, this much crime happened. But then when you think about gang forecasting, now it's trying to like forecast where like the gang injunction would be, right? It per se, and then that's where they would heavily patrol. And not that I'm like making any kind of like significant, like, I'm not like saying anything significant, but I'm just like constantly thinking about how they're evolving, kind of like, you know, the same tactics and trying to, because in some sense, and trying to make them more efficient or trying to use whatever types of technology they can to do something faster and, you know, whatever, better or efficient or whatever. And, you know, and it's not that, you know, this stuff is built on any kind of logic that is legitimate, but it's also, still very dangerous, because even in your second point about the nodes of where trafficking is occurring, and the fact that they kind of allude to, well, we want to see who may possibly be involved in gang violence, that that just kind of starts to kind of demonstrate the harm of everybody kind of being in this dragnet. And then, just like gang injunctions had people and communities like under siege, so will forecasting, where you will similarly get caught up in the forecasting, or get caught up in the the like, the mapping of, gun trafficking. And so it's not like I'm trying to say, like, well, I'm guessing what I'm trying to say is, like, the harm is definitely there, because the ability to map and to track people, like all people, not just people of interest anymore, but like everyone, is very terrifying, and definitely very much like that garrison state we said. But at the same time, it's like built off the false logics again of just the fact that they're looking to be able to eradicate a certain type of person and certain types of problems through the use of kind of like this militarized violence. And yeah, so anyways, thank you for
A
sharing
bunch of
that.
it says it right here, as like how we were just talking about the community safety partnerships and all of that. So how mapping the gang set space, so it's already predetermined of the public housing projects with only one gang, the entire neighborhood, and how it impacts that. And here, when we get into dynamic networks through the FI cards, we were just talking about the field interview, that why we saw that example for Pueblo del Rio, that what Amira was showing, that why the bulk of all of that activity is field interview cards. So from there, then they move into the social networks, and on and on and on. So yeah, I mean, this is the MOA that that Jenny was just was referring to, between the George Tita and Jeff Rantham and the LAPD, going back in this was signed in 2010. So yeah, sorry, Jenny, I thought I'll just throw it out there.
No, thank you. And yeah, Jamie, I agree with everything that you said. I just wanted to answer Shakir's question really quick. Shakir asked when the NDA with George Tita, the last thing about the social networks of arrestees in the illegal firearms market, was from, and that's a 2015 NDA. Do folks have any other questions or thoughts? Yeah, Matt.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's interesting that Jeff Brantingham, he was also on the team of UCLA academics who evaluated the community safety partnerships in 2020, and he did a lot of the data analysis. I think that was his role, rather than doing more of these interviews, or like, I don't think he was involved with the community side of the evaluation. But it's interesting to think about, the timeline over the last 10 years and the different kinds of projects that academics have been involved in, whether these kind of internal efficiency, or like improvements of techniques, that like of what you were talking about today, Jenny, or these other kinds of evaluation things that are intended to like provide public legitimacy for the different reformist programs like the CSPs, and trying to think about them together. I haven't, I don't know, sometimes I haven't wrapped my head around when some of these things are best publicized by these academics and the police together, or when they happen secretively, or what, but and what the role of like the university insignia is in kind of granting some legitimacy or value to a wider audience. Those are all the things I'm thinking about, but your presentation really helped to spur some of those thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tiff, I don't know if you want to speak to the synthetic control group, but just to speak to like your legitimacy point, Matt, like in the same CIPRA, there's like information from Craig Uchita's, like there's like a podcast that he did, and I mean, like they literally speak to how, you know, being involved or closely connected to academia like makes the public trust them more, and that's how like what they use to get the public to trust them more. So I think that's pretty spot on.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. I'll just add, and I know it's like 1 minute before 8 o'clock, but I'll just add that, yeah, regarding yeah, just to follow up on that point, that with Brantingham being involved in that evaluation in 2020, as recently as 2020, of CSP, I was listening back to that May presentation by Georgia Leap to the Police Commission. That was kind of her glowing presentation about how fantastic this program was, and you know, in the eyes of UCLA, and how they had evaluated it. And yeah, I was very interested to hear that Brantingham was the, you know, when they did this assessment, which they say is totally legitimate, even though they only looked at 2 of 9 existing CSP sites for this evaluation, which made sweeping generalizations about how successful the program is. And they only looked at 2 of 9 sites, and those sites were recommended by LAPD as to be the ones that they looked at. But anyway, so when they looked at those sites and then they took information and crime information, which again is flawed, but they took that information and compared it to so-called control groups to see how, you know, how is CSP measuring up. Who created those control groups? But Brantingham was the person who created what they called like these synthetic models of control groups, because of course the controlled groups don't actually exist in real life. So he created these synthetic models to compare it to. And they found, wow, it's really working to drive down crime and make communities safer. So yeah, just echoing that, yeah, he was very much a part of that. And so again, these are kind of some of the relationships that are being you know, that we knew about, but kind of learning more about some of these things as well, and connecting them to you know, not learning more about not only what was going on prior, but what is kind of continuing to go on, and how these people are continuing to work with LAPD in trying to put a legitimate face on these programs, and continuing to push them through successfully. So and I think we may have to, I'll just pause because I don't want to cut you off, Jenny, but I think we may have to kind of leave in terms of the updates on this. We may have to leave it there for now, but it's let me know that we very much have to leave a lot more space for this in our next presentation. But is there anything, Jenny, that you wanted to add about that before we kind of close it out?
No, not at all. Thanks so much, Tiff.
Okay, thanks so much, Jenny, for that. And yeah, there was like so much stuff that we looked at. There's a lot more to come. And again, if folks want to get involved and kind of look at this, because, you know, folks do have different information, different contacts. There may be different things that kind of grab folks or that folks are interested in. So we're interested in, if anyone wants to take a look at this data or perhaps do any research themselves, it's you know, it's as simple as kind of going to Google and just kind of looking some of this stuff up and kind of doing that work of chasing down information. So yeah, please let us know. And so before we'll just do a quick word on this really important ordinance that I'm sure folks are already aware of, but just letting folks know, because there's going to be a vote in front of City Council tomorrow regarding 4118D. Hamid, are you able to just let folks know what that is about?
Yeah, just in a 30-second overview, it's a recriminalization of unhoused folks. And this is going to be applied all over the city. There's a big action tomorrow and it's going to really make people's lives miserable. It gives you know, wide powers to the city council to invoke things at any time. So there's a big action at LA City Hall organized by several organizations. So the coalition is going to be there in support, and obviously our home, LA Can, is one of the key organizations that's fighting back this criminalization of the unhoused folks. So just meet us there at 9:30 tomorrow morning. The action starts at 10, and tomorrow is the main vote. They already took one vote before they went into recess, but it wasn't fully instituted because they didn't have a unanimous vote. It's a procedural thing. So now it's coming back for another vote tomorrow, which it just requires simple majority. So if 8 of the city council members vote, then it goes to the mayor, and the mayor has expressed his desire to sign it. So this is a dramatic shift. It is, again, intense criminalization of poverty, and given that overwhelming majority of unhoused folks are Black and brown and overwhelmingly Black. So this is, again, where race and poverty get criminalized. So please join us.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Hamid. And thanks to everyone who was able to join and share and ask questions and make comments. And thanks to folks who shared information today. Please contact us if you would like more information and or to get involved. And yes, have a good rest of the evening. Thank you so much, and have a good evening. And I'm sorry, I see a question. Where is the location again? And I believe the location for tomorrow is at City Hall. Rally is
Los Angeles City Hall. Yeah.
There you go. Okay. Thank you so much.